Okay, let's unpack this. Early American literature. You might think it's all straightforward tales of the New World, but Abbas Mahmoud al-Awwad, in his work, he flags this really fascinating tension.
Yeah, it's this kind of core duality, isn't it?
Exactly. It's this dance between practical experience, that self-reliance idea so tied to the American identity, and then, the established ethical traditions, the norms.
And how those sometimes align, but sometimes they really clash, creates some compelling friction.
And that dynamic, that push and pull, is sort of the lens we're using today for our deep dive into the American short stories evolution.
It's really interesting how Al-Quad, coming from, well, an Arab literary perspective, zeroes in on that specific tension as a defining thing. Makes you think, what really shapes a national literature?
Right. Is it sticking strictly to old rules, or is it embracing that raw individual experience, especially when you're a new nation still figuring itself out?
Hmm.
And for this deep dive, we're working with material from Aliquad's various aspects of the short story in American literature. We've got translated bits, his analysis.
So the mission is basically to trace how that core dynamic he spots plays out across different writers, different periods.
Got it. From the early pioneers right up to some more modern, enduring voices, we'll hit quite a range.
And the short story itself is kind of perfect for that, isn't it? More concentrated than a novel.
Yeah, like a perfect little snapshot.
Aliquid mentions that too, how it grew out of earlier forms, like story or novelette, he calls them. It's not just about being short, but about that sharp focus.
Right. So let's go back to the beginnings, when that early American identity was, starting to form.
Hmm.
Aliquid really hammers home how experience Eucremem became such a defining thing in the writing.
Direct engagement, learning by doing, that self-reliance spirit again.
And, well, naturally, that sometimes put people at odds with the old ways, the established customs. Selling Chen.
So how did the writers actually weave that into their stories? Aliquid brings up that quote from James Gibbons Huneker.
Oh, yeah, about purification. Thea not really being the main goal in American novels then.
Exactly. Contrasting them with European novels, which often had a clear moral or maybe political agenda.
Okay, so less about teaching lessons, maybe more about just showing life as it was lived.
Seems that way. Aliquid notes, 17th century was heavy on religion, then the revolution brought in politics.
And the literary culture we recognize kind of came later, and the short story solidifies out of those earlier, maybe fuzzier narrative types.
That delay is interesting, like the nation focused on politics and society first, then the arts followed. The short story then becomes a space for those immediate personal takes on being American.
Makes sense. And who better to start with than Washington Irving? Aliquid points out his stuff was big even back then, foundational.
Right, America was actively looking for its own voice, something distinctly American. Irving being established early, like Aliquid emphasizes, really helped shape that.
And Irving knew it, didn't he? Aliquid shares that story about his publisher dealings.
Oh yeah, prioritizing the American perspective over just like international fame, contrasting him with Moore, the English author.
Yeah, it really shows that balancing act. Aliquid talks about national identity versus global recognition.
A great little insight.
Aliquid then gives us this picture of that literary circle, the one around Landlord Khan at the George III's Head Tavern.
Sounds like a mix of hanging out, gossiping.
But also real intellectual chat, with Professor Ala Lamadarek and landlord Nicola Fidar debating everything from news to obscure facts.
That whole scene, it gives you the context, the sort of soil where these early stories grew, local color, anecdotes, maybe some thinking aloud.
And the prime example, Irving's Rip Van Winkle.
Ah, Rip. Classic. You know the just lazy guy, loves hunting squirrels more than work.
Yeah, Irving sets him up not as bad, just unproductive by the standards of the day. Maybe a subtle commentary right there.
Could be. Then, boom, the weird mountain encounter, the mysterious drink.
And that super long nap.
It's the fantasy element that lets Irving explore time and change so dramatically, isn't it? He's yanked out of one era and dropped into another.
And everything's changed. His dun's ancient, the mountain looks different.
He even sees someone who looks just like him. And when he tries to explain being gone for years, nobody gets it.
That confusion totally mirrors what America was going through, right? The revolution happened while he slept.
Exactly. The world he knew, gone. Aliquid even suggests, maybe it's a little commentary on queso, the sominji, basically lack of work discipline and maybe too much gambling.
Huh. So even in these early tales, You see that individual experience rips weird nap bumping up against big societal shifts.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's jump forward. Edgar Allan Poe, a very different vibe.
Yeah, Aliquid mentions his rough life, orphan, adopted, all that, but really focuses on the maturity of his art, especially in the short story form.
He really took the short story somewhere else, didn't he? Detective fiction, deep dives into psychology.
Totally.
Yeah.
Less focus on big societal stuff, more on the individual mind's complexities.
Let's talk the purloined letter. Aliquid sets it up. Dupin's study in Paris. Monsieur G, the police prefect, totally stumped by this stolen letter.
Right, stolen from a royal personage. And what's great is Dupin, the brainy detective. He solves it not with force, but with thinking, understanding people.
While the police are tearing the place apart, Aliquid describes them searching everywhere. Needles, microscopes, the works.
You'd think they'd find it. But Dupin spots the flaw. They're looking where they think it should be hidden.
Not considering the obvious.
Exactly. Dupin figures the minister, being smart and a bit of a poet, maybe even plays mind games, would hide it in plain sight.
Based on that game with maps and names.
Yeah, based on understanding the minister's psychology. The minister thinks he's too clever, no one would look somewhere so obvious. Dupin sees right through it.
So how does he get it back?
He just visits the minister, acts casual, and swaps the real letter for a fake one he made.
Smooth. It really shows off his brain power over brute force.
And Aliquid adds that Dupin wasn't just solving a puzzle, he was helping the lady being blackmailed.
Oh, right. The minister has had her in his power.
And settling an old score with Miss UG. So he's got personal reasons too, not just a thinking machine.
And that final touch, leaving a quote from Crébillon in the fake letter.
Classic Dupin. A little intellectual flourish on his way out.
Okay, but Poe had a much, much darker side too. The cask of Amontillado.
Oof, yeah. Aliquid points to that one for pure revenge, the really scary parts of human nature.
The carnival setting against the creepy catacombs. It's such a contrast.
And Montresor playing on Fortunato's pride about wine. So calculated, chilling.
That whole descent, the bones, Fortunato getting sicker, begging. It's claustrophobic.
And Montresor just walling him up, brick by brick, those last lines. Terrifying. He's like experience twisted into pure malice, no ethics in sight.
Totally chilling. Okay, let's lighten things up. Mark Twain.
Ah, yes, Sammy Clemens. Aliquid emphasizes how his varied life, all those jobs, the travel fed into that amazing writing style.
That mix of everyday talk and formal language. Genius.
And using humor and satire to get at deep truths about human nature, as Aliquid says. He could make you laugh and think hard at the same time.
Aliquid mentions Bert Hart's influence and how Twain tackled serious stuff like corruption in The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg, but with humor.
And even though it's not detailed in the excerpts we have, you have to mention the notorious jumping frog of Calaveras County, right? Or the celebrated jumping frog.
Oh, definitely. Quintessential Twain. That regional humor, the tall tale vibe.
Right.
It's so American. Aliquid would appreciate that, I think.
For sure. The absurdity, the dialect. It's pure Twain. His characters really live that experience-driven life Aliquid identified. They figure things out by doing, not by following rules.
Okay, next up, Thomas Bailey Aldrich, Boston literary scene guy.
Yeah, Aliquid puts him in that circle, notes his style blending reality and storytelling.
He represents more that local color school, right? Observing social stuff, maybe a bit sentimental.
Kind of. And he uses that letter format epistolary in Marjorie Daw. So the story just unfolds through the mail.
Right, the letters between Dr. Dillon and Edward Delaney about their friend John Fleming, who's laid up.
Delaney's bored stiff, so Dillon invents a neighbor, Marjorie Daw, just to entertain him.
And Delaney totally buys it, starts asking questions.
And Dillon just keeps making stuff up, more and more elaborate descriptions. Then he invents Mr. and Miss Daw, too. Delaney's desperate to meet her.
It's funny because Delaney's so serious and Dillon's just having a laugh.
Exactly, playing with imagination, storytelling itself.
And the punchline is Delaney finding out she doesn't exist via another letter from Dillon confessing the whole prank.
It's light, but it makes little points about, boredom, friendship, how stories work.
Okay, George Ade. Aliquid highlights his use of slang and social satire.
Addy really nailed the way people actually talked then. Focus on regular folks, rural life, students. Use humor to poke fun at social climbing and manners.
The bit we have involves Mr. and Mrs. Wallace and Ivy. Talking about dinner guests, Ivy knowing some family from Baltimore. Mrs. Wallace is clearly keeping score socially.
You can just feel her wanting to seem important. Ade shows that through the dialogue perfectly.
Then there's that bit between Ivy and Ed, maybe some romance there. And that funny question about whether Ivy's visiting Ed as a friend or a servant.
Yeah, and Mrs. Wallace eventually gives in. Aide uses these small moments to say a lot about the social anxieties of the time. Experience, but viewed through that social lens.
Now for Willa Cather. Aliquod connects her to the West, the frontier, and psychological realism.
Cather often explores how people connect to their environment, especially the West. And she really gets inside her characters' heads.
The excerpt sounds exactly like Paul's case, even if the title isn't there. Paul's appearance, thin, defiant, kind of effeminate. The principal questioning him about his attitude, that expression on his face.
Paul feels totally out of step, doesn't he? His artistic side clashes hard with what society expects.
The teachers complain, there's that incident with the blackboard. He seems checked out, lost in art and beauty, like looking at pictures or hiding out in his fancy hotel room.
Yeah, he's obsessed with this idealized world because his real life feels so drab, so ugly to him. He's desperate to escape.
And the ending is just devastating. Jumping in front of the train, Aliquod links it to him just not being able to keep that fantasy world going, rejecting reality completely.
It's such a powerful story about alienation, the artist versus society, and what happens when that conflict just breaks someone.
I'm switching gears again. Edna Ferber. Aliquod sees her focusing on American women and social change.
Ferber was known for strong female characters, yeah. And looking at how different generations saw things, the moral shifts.
The excerpt is from Old Man Minnick. It shows him with his son George and daughter-in-law Nettie. You really feel those generational gaps.
And the challenges of living together, right? Nettie trying to manage his habits, like his snacking, it highlights those tensions.
But there's that moment where Minnick perks up with his old buddies, trying to join their chat, but feels lost, unheard.
Oh, that really gets you. That feeling of becoming invisible as you age, losing your place.
And the scene where he offers Nettie money for taking care of him, wow, shows he knows he's dependent, remembers being independent.
It's so subtle but powerful.
Yeah.
Family dynamics, aging, dignity, it's all in there.
Next, Stephen Vincent Benet. Aliquod links him to American folklore, supernatural stuff.
Benet loved using American history and legends, often with a bit of fantasy, digging into identity and morality.
The Pale described sounds exactly like the devil and Daniel Webster, Jabez Stone making a deal with Mr. Scratch.
Right, the guy in black with the weird cart, classic Faustian bargain stuff, good versus evil.
And then Daniel Webster comes in, the famous orator arguing before that jury of the damned. Aliquod notes how Webster appeals to their patriotism, their shared American experience.
This becomes this big symbolic fight for America's soul, doesn't it? Arguing for the goodness of the common person against temptation.
And Webster wins. Saves Jabez's soul. A real feel-good, patriotic ending.
Yeah, reinforces that idea of American exceptionalism, the power of words grounded in shared values.
Okay, finally, Aliquod looks ahead. From his time, to writers like Hemingway and Faulkner, he sees them dealing with universal human issues.
But still connected to those earlier themes, right? Experience, self-reliance, just maybe on a broader stage.
He mentions Faulkner's focus on the South, exploring suffering, but also believing in human resilience. We get hints of A Rose for Emily, that macabre ending.
And barn-burning loyalty versus morality.
And that Evening Sun, dealing with racial tensions and fear. Faulkner really dug into the dark currents, the weight of the past.
Definitely. And Hemingway. Aliquod points to his focus on action, self-reliance, that sporting attitude towards life and writing.
The Killers is mentioned as an example, violence, fate, that post-WWI disillusionment.
Yeah, Hemingway's clipped style, his characters facing tough situations.
Right.
It's another kind of self-reliance, stoic endurance in a harsh world.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, it's really striking, seeing through Aliquod's eyes how these stories track that tension he identified from the start. Experience versus tradition, ethics.
We saw in stories about forging an identity, exploring the mind, making social commentary.
And the sheer range of voices. Irving's whimsy, Poe's darkness, Twain's humor, the local flavor from Aldrich, Ade, Cather, Ferber. Then Benet, Faulkner, Hemingway pushing into different territory.
It's an incredible tapestry of American life, especially seen through the lens of a 20th century Arab critic. Really fascinating perspective.
And here's something to chew on. How do those themes, those styles still echo, or maybe how have they changed in American short stories today? Which writer or theme really grabbed you, and what does that say about how we still wrestle with individual experience versus our shared values now?
Definitely food for thought.